Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this world of Torah. I hope everyone has had a wonderful and joyful, meaningful Passover celebration. This evening we are in Parshat Shemini, which is in the book of Leviticus, at the very start of chapter 9. We'll read through our English translation of the Torah portion. I'll share with you a little bit of a focus study, and then we will open it up for our collective conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute it this time, we can together recite our blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Leviticus, chapter 9, verse 1. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before Adonai. And speak to the Israelites, saying, take a he-goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before Adonai, and a meal offering with oil mixed in. For today Adonai will appear to you." Anna, do you want to read a little bit? Okay. Richard, would you like to read a little bit at verse 5?
Yes, thank you, Brother. They brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moses had commanded. The whole community came forward and stood before the Lord. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, making expiation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offering and make expiation for them, as the Lord has commanded."
Thank you. And Sherry, would you like to read starting at verse 8?
Thank you. Aaron came forward to the altar and slaughtered his calf of sin offering. Aaron's son brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar, and he poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. The fat, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the liver and the skin offering, he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin were consumed in fire outside the camp.
Okay. Then he slaughtered the burnt offerings. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it against all sides of the altar. They passed the burnt offering to him in sections, as well as the head, and he turned it into smoke on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering.
Thank you. Anna, do you want to read at verse 15?
Sure. Next, he brought forward the people's offering. He took the goat for the people's purgation offering and slaughtered it and presented it as a purgation offering like the previous one. He brought forward the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to regulation. He then brought forward the meal offering and, taking a handful of it, he turned it into smoke on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering of the morning. He slaughtered the ox and the ram, the people's sacrifice of well-being. Aaron's son passed the blood to him, which he dashed against every side of the altar, and the fat parts of the ox and the ram, the broad tail, the covering fat, the kidneys, the protuberances of the livers. They laid these fat parts over the breasts, and Aaron turned the fat parts into smoke on the altar and elevated the breasts and the right thighs as an elevation offering before God, as Moses had commanded.
Thank you. June, would you like to continue there at verse 22?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Aaron lifted his hands towards the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
Thank you. And Dave, would you like to start there at verse 1 of chapter 10?
Okay. Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan and put fire in it and laid incense on it. And they offered before Adonai alien fire which had not been enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Adonai. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what Adonai meant by saying, through those near me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people." And Aaron was silent.
Thank you, Dave. Robin, would you like to continue at verse 4?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, "Come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics, as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not bare your heads and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kin, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that Adonai has wrought. And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For Adonai's anointing oil is upon you." And they did as Moses had bidden.
Thank you, Robin. Margot, would you like to read at verse 8?
Yes. Thank you. And the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, "Drink no wine or other intoxicant, you and your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is the law for all time, throughout the ages, for you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, between the unclean and the clean. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which the Lord has imparted to them through Moses."
Thank you, Margaret. Let me invite David and Susan if you would continue starting at verse 12.
Thank you, Rabbi. I lost my place. 12.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Moses spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and to Ithamar, his remaining sons. "Take the grain offering left from the fire offerings of the Lord and eat it as flat cakes by the altar, for it is holy of holies. And you shall eat it in a holy place, for it is your portion and your son's portion from the fire offerings of the Lord, for thus I have been charged." Go ahead, David.
"And you shall eat the bread of the elevation offering and the thigh of the donation in a pure place, you and your sons and your daughters with you, because they have been given as your statutory share, and your son's statutory share from the peace offering sacrifices of the children of Israel. They shall bring the thigh of the donation and the breast of the elevation offering with the offerings by fire of the fats to elevate an elevation offering in front of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, and it will be yours and your sons with you as an eternal law, as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh commanded."
Thank you so much. Paul, would you like to read starting at verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. Moses inquired insistently about the he-goat and the sin offering. For behold, it had been burned, and he was wrathful with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, saying, "Why did you not eat the sin offering in a holy place? For it is most holy, and he gave it to you to gain forgiveness for the sin of the assembly and to atone for them before Hashem. behold, its blood was not brought into the sanctuary within. You should have eaten it in the holy, as I had commanded. Aaron spoke to Moses. Was it they who this day offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before Hashem? Now that such things befell me, were I to eat this day's sin offering, would Hashem approve? Moses heard and he approved.
Thank you so much. Marty, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 11?
Thank you, Rabbi. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hoofs, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. The following, however, of those that either chew the cud or have the true hoofs shall not eat. The camel, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs. It is unclean for you. The damane, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs. It is unclean for you. The hare, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs. It is unclean for you. And the swine, although it has true hoofs, with the hoofs cleft through, it does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You shall not eat of their flesh or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you."
Thank you, Martin. And Mark, would you like to read starting at verse 9?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. These you may eat of all that live in water, anything in water, whether in the seas or in the streams that has fins and scales. These you may eat, but anything in the seas or in the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of the water, and among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination for you, and an abomination for you they shall remain. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall abominate their carcasses. Everything in the water that has no fins and scales shall be an abomination for you.
Thank you, Mark. Robert, would you like to continue at verse 13?
Yes, thank you. And these are they which ye shall have in abomination, fowls. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle and the ossifrage and the osprey and the vulture and the kite after his kind, every raven after his kind, and the owl and the nighthawk and the cuckoo and the hawk after his kind, and the little owl and the cormorant and the great owl and the swan and the pelican and the gier eagle and the stork, the heron after her kind, and the lapwing and the bat. All fowls that creep, going upon all four, shall be an abomination unto you. Yet these may eat of every flying, creeping thing that goeth upon all four, which have legs above their feet to leap withal upon the earth. Even these of them ye may eat, the locust after his kind, and the bald locust after his kind, and the beetle after his kind, and the grasshopper after his kind. But all the other flying, creeping things which have 4 feet shall be an abomination unto you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Tom and Jackie, would you like it to continue at verse 24?
And the following shall make you impure. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be impure until evening, and whoever carries the carcasses of any of them shall wash those clothes and be impure until evening. Every animal that has true hoofs, but without clefts through the hoofs, or that does not chew the cud, they are impure for you. Whoever touches them shall be impure. Also, all animals that walk on paws, among those that walk on 4s, are impure for you. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be impure until evening. And anyone who carries their carcasses shall wash those clothes and remain impure until evening. They are impure for you.
you.
Following shall be impure for you from among the things that swarm on the earth: the mole, the mouse, the great lizard, and every variety, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. Those for you are impure among all things, swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be impure until evening. Anything on which one of them falls when dead shall be impure, be it any article of wood, cloth, skin, or a sack. Any such article can be put to use, shall be dipped in water, and shall remain impure until evening. Then it shall be pure. And if any of those falls into an earthen vessel, everything inside it shall be impure, and the vessel itself you shall break. As to any food that may be eaten, it shall become impure if it came in contact with the water. As to any liquid that may have been drunk, it shall become impure, as if it was inside the vessel. Everything on which the carcass of any of them falls shall be impure. An oven or stove shall be smashed. They are impure, and impure they shall remain to you.
Thank you. And Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 36?
Thank you, Rabbi. But a spring or a cistern, a gathering of water, remains clean. However, one who touches their carcass shall become unclean. And if of their carcass falls upon any sowing seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put upon seeds, and any of their carcass falls on them, they are unclean for you. If any animal that you normally eat dies, one who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. And one who eats of its carcass shall immerse his garments, and he shall be unclean until evening. And one who carries its carcass shall immerse his garments, and he shall be unclean until evening.
Thank you, Justin. Let me invite Rose. Would you like to start reading there at verse 41?
Thank you, Rabbi. All the things that swarm upon the earth are an abomination. They shall not be eaten. You shall not eat among all things that swarm upon the earth anything that crawls on its belly, or anything that walks on fours, or anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through anything that swarms. You shall not make yourselves impure therewith, and thus become impure. For I, Hashem, am your God. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not make yourselves impure through any swarming thing that moves upon the earth. For I, Hashem, am the one who brought you from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy. These are the instructions concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that swarm on earth, for distinguishing between the impure and the pure, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten.
Thank you. And that concludes our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to invite you to take out the study sheet if you have a copy. And I'd actually like to enter into our dialogue with the Torah portion by first spending some time with our artist for this week and his painting. And our artist is Giorgio De Chirico. De Chirico was born in 1888 in Greece to Italian parents. Eventually, he goes to study art in Rome and Berlin and Florence. And eventually, he will move to Paris in about 1911. And he had this extraordinary experience. It was in 1909 when he was living in Florence, and he was recovering from a disease and some kind of intestinal disease. And he was sitting in one of the beautiful plazas that they have in Florence. And all of a sudden, he said, the whole world around him became disoriented. And he looked at the very substantial material that was there, the buildings, the fountains, the marble structures, and he said they all seemed to be convalescent. And he said this notion about the convalescent state of the world around him heightened his sense about not only estrangement from it all, and as if he were encountering the world for the first time, he developed a deeper sense of compassion for the mysteries that were around him. Now, de Chirico moves to Paris in 1911, where he continues to study and to paint. And he, as a result of this one incident in Florence, he develops a series of paintings over the next 10 years, which become known as, yes, if everyone can go on mute if you're not ready to speak, that would be helpful. We're getting a little bit of feedback. He paints a series of paintings as a result of this encounter called the Metaphysical Town Square series. And these paintings of town squares all share a similar feeling. They are largely abandoned, of human activity. They consist of large objects, classical in their form and structure. Sometimes there'll be a very large statue dominating them all. And de Chirico was embraced by some of the modernists in the art world at the time when he was in Paris, including the Dadaists, and he became an influence on those artists who later became known as the Surrealists. There's something different about de Chirico's sense of detachment and his sense of commentary on modern urban life, which is different than either the Dadaists or the Surrealists. The Dadaists had a rather contemptuous attitude towards what they considered to be bourgeois life, middle-class life, the modern world, which they all tried to portray in rather critical and fanciful ways. And then later after them come the Surrealists, who in their own way portray that middle-class life and modernity is with a kind of mocking irony. When I look at de Chirico's paintings, I don't have either a sense of his condemnation about the world around him or a sense of irony about them. What I get is a sense of despair. And eventually, he will actually turn on those modern movements and will become more conservative in his approach. It'll be also almost develop a neoclassical approach to his artwork. But here, what de Chirico is trying to share with us, as I see it in his paintings, especially those related to the town squares, is a sense that we need to appreciate the mystery of the world around us, and to purge ourselves of our certainty of understanding what we're seeing. And here in number one is a quote from him. "What is especially needed is great sensitivity, to look upon everything in the world as an enigma, to live in the world as in an immense museum of strange things." So his sense of estrangement from the world around him wasn't so much a condemnation of the world, it was a sense of pathos about the world around him. And his sense of estrangement, I think, was his way of trying to renew his engagement with the world, to renew and reconstruct what he saw, rather than taking everything for granted, to have a sense of the mystery of it all. So it's with this sense of as de Chirico puts it, what's needed is to live in the world as in an immense museum of strange things. I want to take that sensitivity and look at this week's Torah portion, because we have this extraordinary event that happens. we have the sons of Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, who bring some kind of fire immediately after Moses and Aaron have inaugurated the Mishkan for the first time with an offering. And this truly astounding event happens where fire comes forth from God, consumes the offering, and immediately afterwards, Nadab and Abihu, they too rush forward with their offering. Instead, something goes terribly wrong. And the text describes it as Nadab and Abihu offering a strange fire before God. And then something perhaps even stranger happens in our text, which is that fire once again comes forth from Adonai, but instead of consuming an offering that was brought by the human beings, it consumes the human beings themselves, it seems, Nadav and Abihu. And in the face of this disruption of what was to be this wonderful and glorious and momentous moment of initiating the Mishkan after all the time that was spent constructing it, here was the first time it was to be used. And then to have this terrible event happen, it seems as if everyone is not sure how to respond to it, what to make of it. Moses tries to make some, let me put it this way, he does some theological spin. He tries to make sense of what has happened to Nadav and Abihu, as if it is some form of honoring God. Aaron himself, who's just lost these two sons of his, is apparently traumatized or stunned into silence, or perhaps we can read his silence as a rebuke to Moses, that he's not willing to participate in what Moses has just declared as some kind of rationale for what has happened. And then we have hundreds of years of rabbinic commentary trying to make sense of this event that has just happened, which has taken the lives of two people on the first day of this initiation of the Mishkan, trying to explain, well, what Nadav and Abihu might have done that was wrong. But of course, all of this ignores the fact that this whole event itself is terribly, terribly strange. Sometimes we can be in the middle of something that is so beyond our comprehension, that is such an anomaly to what we expected to happen, that we don't even understand how to begin to process the event, much less to give it some kind of meaning. And in number 3, we have this quote from Elie Wiesel, who was himself a survivor of the terrible fire that we call the Shoah, which we are about to have an observance about in just a few days. And Elie Wiesel, who survived all this, who was in the middle of this terrible fire, said, "I, who was there, still do not understand." So here we are thousands of years after this event that's being described here. We were not even there. We're reading it from a distance. Can we possibly understand what has happened? I want to suggest that one way of understanding it is, rather than trying to understand the event itself, this year I'm trying to understand the structure of the narrative as conveying a message, rather than the actual text of the narrative itself. And I was thinking, it's interesting, up till this point in the book of Leviticus, we have had no narrative event. We've only had descriptions about how these offerings are to take place. And then we have this narrative event which disrupts what should have been a clear system that created order for everyone, a system of these offerings that should have been kind of a religious and spiritual routine that should have explained everything. And then we have this event, and it's almost as if Torah itself is saying that narrative itself, that is, the actual life of human beings, is fraught with all kinds of risks and unknown and mystery. That if we think that we can just live according to a recipe of how we're supposed to behave and how we're supposed to do things, that we are kind of living an illusion, and that to live one's life, to take action, is full of enigma. Okay, so I think that, so I read it as Torah kind of giving us a little bit of a warning about what it means to live in the world as opposed to just following instructions in a world. And I'm going to start wrapping this up, my sharing this with you. We're going to conclude with a little bit of a quote, from one of the great theologians of our time, Walter Brueggemann, who was a Methodist teacher and scholar. And he notes that the capacity, what makes Jewish tradition so fascinating to him is its capacity to not seek to try and explain everything as much as to be honest about everything. And that to be honest in the world means that sometimes themes of celebration are right up against themes of tragedy, themes of affirmation, sometimes right up against themes of protest. So for example, here we have some excerpts in number 4 from Psalm 89. Let me share with you those verses. I will sing of God's steadfast love forever. To all generations, I will proclaim your faithfulness with my mouth. I declare your steadfast love is confirmed forever. There in the heavens, you establish your faithfulness. And then a few lines later, you, God, have rejected, spurned, and become enraged at your anointed. You have repudiated the covenant with your servant. You have dragged his dignity in the dust. So here in one psalm, we have voices of celebration, of affirmation of God's love and recognition for the Jewish people. And then within the same psalm, these words of protest, of confusion, of perhaps even condemnation of God. And these seek and require no reconciliation. They are just sometimes next to one another, and we sometimes bear one another. And sometimes, as Walter Brueggemann will point out in this beautiful essay that is in a book about the Shoah, an essay he wrote called A Fissure Always Uncontained. He will say, what is beautiful about the Jewish tradition is that it doesn't seek to create a coherency. It seeks to express what it is one is feeling. And that sometimes to try and achieve a sense of coherency, an explanation for everything, is a way of trying to express a triumphant view about the world, that one is in control, that one has a single point of view that should prevail. In the Jewish tradition, he'll say, it's not like that. And indeed, the whole story of Torah is not a triumphant story. It is a story of dissettlement. It is a story of a people on the way, and they never get there in the Torah. And even in the rest of the Jewish Bible, when they do finally get to the promised land, the Jewish Bible is going to end not with triumph and glory. It's going to end with yet another exile and another dissettlement, as if it is telling us this is what life is all about. And you need to be able to contain both of them, the sense of triumph and the sense of despair. So here is from Walter Brueggemann's article, A Fissure Always Contained. Jewish ways of reading yield fragments. The God of this tradition leaves traces. This is a text and a God and a people and a reading habit that give their due to fissure. The rich textual witness to that dislocation, exile, is sufficient evidence that Israel did not know what to say, any more than we do in our moment of fissure. As a consequence of not knowing, Israel said many things. So here he's giving celebration to the fact of something that we all acknowledged. I hope we had the opportunity around our Passover table. That is not a straight, singular storyline that is being read. It is one that is interrupted again and again and again by questions, by many different voices, by 4 different children, by the asking of questions, the pursuit of side visits along the way of themes that we look at. And Brueggemann here in his essay honors that. He says, to have many things to say is what gives the endurance to a people. And it is what gives endurance to those of us who will encounter difficulties, who will encounter separations, who will encounter loss. And we get through those moments by appreciating, on the one hand, sometimes it's just the mystery of it all. And I think that's what de Chirico is doing in his paintings from his series, The Metaphysical Town Squares, which is to just deepen our sense of the enigma of it all, rather than trying to explain it all. And if we deepen our sense of the enigma of it all, we can expand our sense of compassion, humility, and sensitivity. With that, I'd love to hear what you experienced during our reading of this week's Torah portion. Anna.
For the first time, I think in reading this, I noticed that Leviticus 9, say, verse 7, Moses said to Aaron, come forward to the altar and sacrifice your purgation offering. And then it talks about how Aaron did that and how he and Moses went in before God and came back out. Verse 22, Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he stepped down from the altar, and then the fire came forth from before God, from God, and consumed the burnt offering. But the whole purpose of that offering to begin with was to make expiation for yourself and the people. And then the fire came to take that sacrifice. But when Nadab and Abihu went, it doesn't say anything about Moses said to them what they do or why they would do it. And it specifically doesn't say they're doing it for the benefit of anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, man's inhumanity to man is, perhaps that's in there. You said you wanted to follow this chapter about structure somehow. You said something about that. I can't quite remember, but you picked a very structural picture.
Yeah.
What your picture doesn't have in it anywhere really is anything green or living. There's not a sun or a moon or stars. There may be 2 people way down far in the field, and there's a statue of someone, obviously. There's none of God's creation in there. It's man's creation, pretty much, except for perhaps 2 tiny figures.
Mm-hmm.
That's a barrenness to me that I don't care
Barren.
for. This would be a nightmare for me, this picture.
Thank you. Okay. And let me call upon Rose and Jay and Mark. Go ahead, Rose.
Yeah, what I found interesting is the ellipsis about Nadav and Abihu, and I'm thinking that the only other place that I remember this kind of ellipsis is the story of the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, which is the other majorly troubling narrative in the Torah. Why did Abraham just agree without objecting to take his son to be sacrificed? We don't know that. And I think what Anna says is right. It seems to me that this event with Nadav and Abihu, you have Leviticus where the Kohanim are being instructed with all these regulations. And I think that the story of Nadav and Avihu may be kind of an illustration of what happens when you don't do things properly. Either the sequence of what they did, the actions were somehow off, or the intent, the proper intent wasn't there. It may very well be the latter, is, that this is what it's trying to illustrate. Again, it's a very elliptical passage. Most of it is left out. And what's very interesting is, then it's followed by, and I'll let other people comment about the bizarre way that Moshe talks to his brother after this horrible event. But it's followed then by this whole thing with the laws of kashrut, which is very detailed. It's identifying all these critters that you shouldn't be eating and everything, and what you do if a critter falls in the pot or if it falls in the oven and all this. And that is in excruciating detail. It follows this very elliptical thing where you don't really know what happens. So that's what I took out of it.
Let me just, I love what you're saying. And one thing that you got me to think about was sometimes in our lives when we encounter some anomalous event that is so traumatic, we're incapable of spending time with it and trying to live with it so that we can assimilate it and learn from it. We immediately go to back to the business of life, the business, the details of what we need to do, and we kind of avoid the whole discussion. So that's one thing I got from what you said that I hadn't seen this time. Let me invite Jay and then Mark and then Marty, and we'll get to Jackie and Tom. Mark Thompson.
Thank you, Rabbi. First of all, I missed it. You said in regards to understanding, you said, don't try, there was a quote I wanted to get from you. It says, we don't try to understand or figure out, and I lost you there with the Torah.
There's a notion about sometimes we try and solve every mystery, and sometimes mysteries are best assimilated by just experiencing them and appreciating them, allowing them to humble us, rather than assuming that we can impose some kind of construct and order upon the event.
What comes to mind just as you're saying that is the discoveries of the Webb telescope now. It is giving us mysteries now that are, yes, scientifically, these men are going to burn out the rest of men and women are going to burn out the rest of their lives trying to figure out, but it is a profound mystery. And it's just awesome. The second thing I wanted to bring up was I'm looking at the Tanakh I'm reading here. It has a quote from Israel Salanter, who was the founder of the Musar movement, I believe.
Yes.
And it regards all of these food kashrut and everything. And, oh, you're a Jew, you don't eat pork, you don't eat pork. And that's the worldwide thing. But he says this, he says, only twice in the Torah, only twice are we commanded not to eat pork. Yet every Jew knows it is forbidden. The Torah commands us many more times to refrain from gossip and hurtful speech, yet many observant Jews do not sense that they are violating the Torah when they speak ill of others. It's a very interesting take this man had on it about what's important or sticks in our minds and what doesn't.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. And I know that you made Mark Thompson smile when you started to talk about the Hubble telescope. So let me turn to him. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he made me smile when he was talking about pork, because I was just thinking that David Ben-Gurion actually was very supportive of people in Israel being able to eat pork, and he was voted down by the religious bloc, just as an aside. I wanted to react to what Anna was saying because I had a similar reaction to that painting. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the artist was in Italy even before Mussolini. And that architecture that's represented in that painting looks very much like the architecture of the time of Mussolini. And even that figure, it has a kind of a military bearing. And so it doesn't really fit for me when the author says what's especially needed is great sensitivity to look upon everything in the world as an enigma, because this seems to be very rigid and doesn't allow for a lot of creativity. So I find that your selection of that particular painting unusual. But the other thing I wanted to say too is I like what the painter said, that to live in the world as in an immense museum of strange things. And I was thinking, because I'm doing some research right now on France in 17th century. And during that time, there were no museums. Instead, the very wealthy collected items of nature, and they placed them in cabinets of wonders or cabinets of curiosities so that people would be able to experience these wonders of nature. And anyway, I just wanted to bring that out, but no, that's all I have to say
That's
tonight.
fantastic. Thank you.
I just want to say one more thing about that picture. Those two red pillars in the background look all the world to me like they make me think of big smokestacks of crematoria or kilns or something, like everything living has been burnt out of that.
Yeah.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
and when you look at the statue, you know, some kind of a colossus, some kind of almost perhaps fascistic statue of power these are fascinating elements that he's painting. I believe it was in 1910 when he painted this.
So you brought fire into your picture without even thinking about it.
Then we call upon
Mark to defend Ben Gurion, if when the Jews eat the pork, they get trigonometry.
Thank you, Paul. Let me call upon Marty and then Jackie and Tom.
Let me present a big question,
Yeah.
which is, why do people gravitate to faith? And I would like to answer that. I think that at least one answer would be that people want to do the right thing. They want to be right with the Creator. They want to, in the process, become righteous and to protect themselves. And the rabbi before talked about people trying to, establish control. And I think an awful lot of following all these laws in Leviticus and following what's in the Tanakh is to make a better life for yourself and to gain more control over your world. And this passage is particularly interesting because it seems to be saying you can do almost everything right, and it will not guarantee the response that you expect. And of course, it has a Job quality to it, which there's a whole chapter about Job. But you have apparently righteous people, the sons of Aaron, esteemed, almost, kind of in a sense royalty, who are who disappear, who die, and they're almost made sacrifices. So we bring animals to the slaughter in order to gain some sort of credit with the Creator. And the Creator took the children of Aaron instead. It may be mistaken them for sacrifices or decided they would be sacrifices. So I think there's a very important, really deep meaning in this story, which is you can do everything that you think is right, and you will not necessarily get the result you expect.
So I want to thank you for bringing that very rich point of view. And I also want to thank you for mentioning Job, because I had that note that I made when I was studying. I wrote down Job, and then I also wrote down Jacob on his deathbed. And if you remember, when we studied that scene, the commentary says Jacob, when he's surrounded by his sons, is about to tell them how everything is going to happen to the end of days. And then something happens and he doesn't do that, and he shares some other insights. And the commentary seems to be saying, it might be better if everyone didn't know how everything is going to end. Maybe that will sustain them better to not have full knowledge. And the book of Job, of course, is saying a similar message about, you think if you act a certain way that God will act a certain way. You think that you can create a mechanics of how life will be, and the message is no, that's not the way it works. And so I mean, it's amazing to think about. Of course, Torah presents a God who is not located in just one place, that has just one definition to it, that is in charge of just one aspect of all of the world and is stuck there. Judaism comes along and unsticks that God, uproots that God, if you will, makes that God mobile, makes that God ever expansive. And so that message seems to be to have a lack of predictability, if you will. And so that's what's fascinating about the book of Leviticus, because the book of Leviticus seems to be saying, here's the protocol, here's the routine, that if you follow this, then all these good things will happen and so forth. And then we have this eruption at the very beginning of the book of Leviticus that seems to kind of it throws that whole system of predictability up in the air. And then it recovers from it, but then other voices will kind of prevail in Torah as a whole. So I want to thank you very much, Marty, for bringing that to our attention. Let me call upon Jackie and Tom, David, Susan, Dave Leb, Catherine, Robert, and okay. Let me start with Jackie and Tom.
Yeah, you had mentioned something about Aaron being struck dumb. And there was a case report after 9/11. One of the people in the building escaped and he was traumatized and he couldn't speak. This is a case, this is a true case. And he did an MRI on his brain and the speech area, Broca's area, was inactive. It was silent. The rest of his brain was working, but his speech area, and I think if I just saw my two sons emulated, I might go silent too. And so maybe that was an actual event, physical event that happened to Aaron. It's got to be
fascinating.
Yeah, that's troubling. I was going to bring that up too, so I'm going to lower my hand.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. And Jack, did you want to add anything as well?
Well, what I have is a question. It's completely unrelated, but it's about all the blood used in these sacrifices, and I guess this time more than ever, it just really it disturbed me. All the blood tossed all around the altar. There must have been so much blood that they were dealing with. And I guess I always thought of the parts that they sacrificed, but the blood was there always, first and foremost. And is that a reason why Jews don't consume anything with blood? I mean, is that voting, or is there a reason for that we don't eat blood? Is that part of the dietary restriction?
Well, yes, it's actually literally part of the dietary restriction, and the notion being that, as we've read in our text, that the blood contains the life force, if you will, and there's to be some kind of separation between ourselves and the consumption of I guess the pure life force, some kind of degree of separation, detachment, respect, honor. I'm not quite sure.
It seems like it would have been so hard to separate that out at the time when it was everywhere.
Yeah, it was quite an enterprise to operate this system that we're reading about. Absolutely. David and Susan, share with us, please.
Well, I first wanted to thank Marty for his insight. I felt that very strongly. The second thing was, it's a question, but I'll start with what Rose talked about, ellipses. These that I found very similar to what Bergman was calling fissures. Brueggemann was calling fissures. And then that connected up with me with your introduction where you said something about approaching Leviticus, or at least his Torah portion, in terms of structure. So my conclusion, but I'm not at all certain, was that that's the structure you're uncovering in Leviticus, is these fissures, these ellipses, or what?
Yeah.
I mean, or maybe you have not uncovered anything. That's my question. Are fissures structure?
So I think what I was trying to get at very inarticulately is that the sacrificial system presents something that is very clear. You bring these kinds of offerings for these kinds of purposes, and here's how you do them. And so the system seems to be very clear, and the intention of the system is to maintain a good relationship with the source of all life, and so that life can go on. And then after having recited all these rules for somewhat 9 chapters or so, then we have actual human activity for the first time in the book of Leviticus. The first bit of human narrative, the first bit of human beings taking an action, and everything seems to go now collapse. And so there seems to be some, I think, subtext there about that's the way you can't expect to follow a recipe and live a human life. And human life has these moments of disruptions. And the other thing that I thought of as you were sharing your perspective is this notion about fissures. What Brueggemann seems to be alluding to is that when you have fissures, you invite opportunities to try and fill them with perspective and points of view and opinions, and an alternative to that is to try and impose authority and impose single points of view and impose doctrine and explanation. And Brueggemann, in his beautiful language and to his credit, seems to say that in itself is harmful to human development, to try and contain everything within a single point of view, to try and impose authority and explanation upon every event. And he praises the Jewish tradition for understanding that truth and life really is lived in fragments rather than a kind of totality of explanation. And Susan, did you want to share something as well? Yeah.
So I did see a similarity between chapter 9, verse 24, and a fire came out from before the Lord and consumed on the altar the burnt offering and the fat. And chapter 10, verse 2, and the fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them. And maybe it's not clear to me whether it was a punishment or an acceptance of their offering.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, but it is, it opens up absolutely other possibilities to explore down that path.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let me call upon Catherine and Robert.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was thinking about what you said about the recipe and not following a recipe. But also I while we were reading, I fixated on chapter 10, verse 10, for you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean, which brings to mind a number of things. First of all, that people have to use their discretion to distinguish between these, and that this is a process of learning to distinguish the clean from the unclean and the sacred from the profane. And that sort of, for me, look back on what was happening in chapter 10, verse 2, in the sense that it seems, I don't know, to me that there was a kind of confusion there between the sacred and the profane, that we don't have the preparation for the sacred that is necessary there. And that in my mind, that was a sort of transgression of confusing the two.
So what you're, I think, also pointing us in the direction of is the degree of human initiative that this evokes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
beautiful. Thank you. And let me call upon Robert.
Thank you again for a lovely evening. You know, my thoughts aren't as clear as I would like them to be, but I'll offer a few. I love law. We have gravity. We have, you must breathe in, you must breathe out. We have certain basics that if we don't follow, we die or we ruin our lives. One wrong action can ruin our life. But within that law of nature, there's so much freedom in how to express our lives. You know, I've been looking at the beginning of chapter 10. I'm not familiar with this text like all of you are and with the history. But what I see is Moses throwing out two individuals who have violated their faith, unless I'm not understanding this. Because when it said devouring, that's what beasts do. And what is law? I mean, when I think of Moses 3,500 or so years ago, he's giving them everything they need to survive. Guess what? We had years of pandemic. We couldn't wait to get more news. Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Should I do this? Should I do that? And even some of these things to eat and not eat, I think are so germane even today, even though as a Baha'i, I have a different set of laws, but the essence, the goodness in all the religions, it's the same. And the other thing is, when I work backwards and I think of, is God merciful or wrathful? Well, I think he can be both, but Baha'u'llah says the greatness of his mercy surpasseth the fear of his wrath. So I'm on that side. I like to believe in the graciousness and bounteousness of God. All of these came from God for their own protection. And here over and over and over, they're not getting it. Some do, some don't. Some made it to the Holy Land, created the Hebrew Commonwealth, greatest civilization of its time. But Moses made it so clear, you do not obey these laws, you perish. And that's what I've seen in the text over and over. And what is law? For me, it's a relationship between the lover, humanity, and the beloved, God and his teachers. But it could not be expressed like that in the days of Moses. Their understanding of faith was so limited, they came from a background of idol worship. I mean, this is a tremendous leap forward that they're making. But how does law evolve from being something restrictive to something that is the choice wine that intoxicates the soul? For example, one of the things that I know all of us have in common as a law, and as an example, and Mark and I have talked about this, we're absolutely forbidden to backbite or gossip. And Baha'u'llah mentions it in the same sentence as murder. Because when you kill a reputation, when you kill their body, well, which is worse? So for me, I look at what is the balance? But I love the laws that protect me. And I look at what is protective. And if it's good, and here he's telling them what to eat and not to eat, God knows what diseases they would have had if they didn't obey. So I know I've said a lot, but I always enjoy the evening and I always benefit. And as far as the art, there's no light in his art. And you mentioned despair. I went online while we were talking about art, and I looked at about 200 of his images. 3 of them had any amount of light. But a question I have, and you don't have to answer it now because I've taken too much time, but I'd love to know how they made a living. There's so many. They produce so much art. How did they survive? That's what I want to know. So anyhow, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Anyone here? Richard?
Well, Van Gogh sold one painting. I liked what you said, Rabbi, about honoring strangeness. If we look at the world now that's falling apart or seems to be falling apart, and we'll talk about how it's falling apart, and maybe it is, whatever that might mean. But there's so much wonderful stuff going on. Brilliant children being fostered by, being taken care of by wonderful parents. A lot of art going on. That's wonderful stuff. And it is a strange world. And the enigma of human life is right out being shown in front of us. And I think that we're onto something here. And when Rabbi talks about how the structure is put out there, and nobody's mentioned that in the first couple lines, God appears before the people, whatever that word means. Do they get a glimpse of the singularity? Have they internalized, we're all one, we see one another together, and the whole thing is knit together? Well, the next thing that happens is people get wasted and do the wrong thing, and boom, they're taken out. That's pretty strange. And maybe there's a cautionary note there about taking some learning from this existential situation we're in to learn to be less aggressive or be more, what do I want to say, more from the belly and less from the chest. Less wanting to argue and debate and find an answer, but to understand, no, there's great ambiguity here and lots to learn. And we have an opportunity, maybe in a world that's so strange, to not get so upset about it, but to find a different way to vibrate from inside, to find our duration and get our egoism out of the way so that we can build a better community within. And whether the world ends on a note and goes away or doesn't, I don't know. But we have a present that we can behave differently in that then has led up to what's going on. And maybe at the end you get a chance to take the up escalator instead of going down and down and down in acrimony and fear. And this is an opportunity to get these, whatever they are, desires and things that we project onto an enemy out of us. We have a wonderful opportunity to grow and gain more capacity for loving. That's a wonderful thing. And it's strange that it goes on while there's this war going on. There's war everywhere and materialists everywhere. And the empire is falling. But as it says in the song, I put my faith in thee, O Lord, to heal this soldier's heart. I'll put my trust in thee, O Lord. I'm done with Bonaparte.
Thank you. This is a very rich conversation. You've all said so many profound things. I want to try and just wrap up a couple of things. And that's to begin by mentioning something that Robert talked about, which is law. So in Judaism, law is contextual. There is no such thing as an absolute truth. And in traditional Jewish law, any decision that is made is recognized that it is subject to being revised and even overturned at some other time in a different context and with greater understanding. So Judaism is very resistant to the notion of religious doctrine for that reason. And so here we are in this story, in this book of Leviticus, which of all the books would seem to be the one that would create a clear and permanent system to make life work. And here we are, chapter 10 of that book, and there is as if the story of Nadab and Abihu is subverting that with this counter message that says you can't possibly create a system that's going to totally predict everything that's going to happen, that can control everything, because life is also chaos. And we have to learn to live with both chaos and order, with both triumph and defeat, with both affirmation of knowing that God loves us, and then protests about where are you, God, when we're being burned alive. So this is what Judaism produces. This story is producing a people that, as Catherine was pointing out, insists upon, encourages, nurtures, incubates great human innovation, initiative, and multiple points of view, because no single point of view can endure time. There is no colossus that will endure unshattered. Okay, so this is, I think, again, what de Kircho's response to what he sees, and he's painting this just perhaps I think this is a year before the outbreak of World War I, yes, which shatters human Western civilization. We thought we had reached the point through our scientific revolutions, through our industrial revolutions, through the development of reason and rationality, where these kind of mass slaughters of millions and millions and millions of people could not happen. And then it happened. And so de Kircho seems to be anticipating and seeing what's happened, that within civilization is this notion that we have relied so much on what we think we can deduce from evidence around us, and we can create systems, and we can impose a sense of control on order. And he's understanding that it's not the way it works, that you have to let go of your desire for total control. You have to let go of your desire to have a single authority and a single point of view. You have to sometimes immerse yourselves in the wonder, in the enigma, and in the strangeness of life. And that hopefully will induce a sense of humility and sensitivity and compassion for both ourselves, others, and the world around us. And I want to thank each and every one of you for contributing to that in the world, to appreciating a sense that we need to hear more voices. We need to invite others to the conversation. We need to appreciate we don't have all the answers, and that, as Jacob realized on his deathbed, it'd probably be disastrous to try to have all the answers. So we live the questions. And as Elie Wiesel said, the word she'elah, which means question in Hebrew, has in the middle of it the word el, which means God. And God is indeed, he said, found in the question. So God bless you all. I look forward to our regathering, and we learn from one another have a good week and see you next time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Bye, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.